Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, part of Kyriba's Treasury Best Practice series. Today we're going to talk about transforming your Treasury functions through a TMS implementation, and today's webinar will be presented by Actualize Consulting and Kyriba. Let's get into some of the housekeeping items before we begin. During the webinar, everyone will be in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the gray GoToWebinar box. Given that today is only a 30-minute session, if we have time to answer them, we will respond to them during the webinar. Otherwise, we will respond offline. If you experience any technical issues, please dial GoToWebinar support at 1-888-259-8414. Also, today's webinar is eligible for CTP accreditation, and you'll be receiving that via email in the next several days. We'll also be recording today's webinar and sending both a link to the recording and slides in the follow-up email that you'll see in the next several days. It's also available at the Kyriba website, and we will make sure that you have direction towards that specific location. So to kick off to today, I would like to have today's presenters introduce themselves. Presenters, please continue.
Hi, my name is Alicia Kennedy, and as a Senior Manager in the Treasury Practice Group at Actualize, I have over 6 years of experience in delivering Treasury solutions for our clients, ranging in size and spanning across multiple industries. Most of my work is on the technology side, which ranges from road mapping and strategy planning to vendor evaluations to system implementations. For today's session, I will be drawing from my experiences on several dozen TMS implementations spanning across various systems, including Kyriba.
Wonderful, thanks Alicia. My name is R.B. Erickson. I'm the Director of Global Sales Enablement here at Kyriba, and have been with Kyriba for approximately 5 years now. Prior to Kyriba, I've been with another number of other Treasury technology providers in the space, and have been in the Treasury technology space for approximately 12 years, prior to which actually implemented ERP systems. So, again, everybody, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the presentation.
The goal of today's session is to share with you our combined experiences with implementing Treasury systems. Whether you are considering a TMS implementation or have already embarked on one, you should be able to take away from this session tips on how to better plan for and execute your project. We have organized the information into the following buckets that we will call ABCs of a TMS implementation. A for adoption, not just implementation. B for business priorities. C for collaboration. D for documentation. E for expectations. And F for flexibility.
Wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started. We have, as Alicia said, A for adoption, not just implementation. When we take a step back and look at the overall goal of a TMS implementation, it truly is to ensure that the software and the solution is going to be used, and really used as an integral part of your liquidity and risk management. We're not just implementing functionality or implementing technology for the sake of technology. And to do that, it's really important that we understand that if we're just simply going to implement the system without the goal of usage and true adoption, it really ends up being a waste of everyone's time and resources, both time and money. So in order to truly adopt a system rather than just implement software, there's 3 key but really often underappreciated concepts that you see listed here. The first one being change management, long-term support, and then the third, scalability. And I'd like to take just a minute to talk about each one of those specifically. So as we look at change management, very few, if any, software projects are done without process change. From the moment you start evaluating the software during the buying process to the ultimate implementation and adoption, looking for the ways that that technology can help you improve your business processes and controls will set you up for a more successful implementation in the long run and really help assure that adoption that we've been discussing. We want you to also, or make the comment to beware of expediency and convenience. Not that those are always bad. In fact, I think we all like those in life. but they're also generally very short-lived. It often appears convenient and easy to adapt the software to the way you've quote-unquote always done things. However, software is usually designed with the input of many companies, and this can bring a fresh look at best practices and options for your own Treasury team as you look to, again, implement those best practices in addition to the Treasury technology. As we talk about long-term support, in order to be able to fully adopt the Treasury system, you need to be able to support it. And while the customer support from the vendor is important, that's not particularly what I'm referring to at this point and in this instance. And to make sure that you have a system that you personally or your company personally can easily support and upgrade. Companies evolve over time. It's highly probable that the needs that you have today will be different a year from now. And if you're always having to rely on your vendor to do the updates and change the system, you're going to spend a lot of additional time, money, and resources that you really wouldn't spend otherwise. And subsequently, you actually may decide not to perform system changes that you truly need to do to maintain that adoption. There's a few do's and don'ts on the up on your screen. A couple suggestions on the do side. Centralize the management of that static data configuration, as well as that streamlining or centralizing the questions. If you have some admins and super users that know how the system works, that can really streamline that support from anywhere from, again, the data through the questions. On the don'ts side, or things to avoid, don't take for granted the state of the system as it is right after the implementation. You've done a lot of work, you put everything in order, but as time passes, just like my kids' room, they kind of get in disarray. And we've just got a daily management of that and making sure that it stays up to date, and you become very disciplined in ensuring that it stays clean. And then also, don't underestimate the amount of knowledge that you have internally. You've gone through the implementation, you know the system, you know your business, and you're able to do a lot of that support and have that knowledge internally. It actually goes nicely, that last bullet point under don'ts goes nicely with the first bullet point under do's, and as well as the streamlining of questions, because if you can streamline those questions, you have a lot of that knowledge in-house to be able to support the system. And then finally on scalability. As I refer to scalability in this particular situation, it truly is synonymous with change. It also is an extension of the evolution of a company that I mentioned in the previous slide. So whether you're growing as a company and expanding, whether you're in a situation where you might be contracting, your company will change and the TMS needs to adapt with you. To be quite frank, any good system will be able to adapt or should be able to adapt along with you. If not, you probably chose the wrong system. One good indication of a system's ability to scale is their current client base. So for example, if you run across and the vendors you're dealing with, if their client base is mostly Fortune 100 companies, then they may not be a good fit for smaller companies. Or the reverse of that is also true. If the client base is mostly small companies, then they may not be able to handle a lot of the demands that come with a larger, more sophisticated organization. So as you go through change, please make sure that you manage the change as a project. Some changes may be small, others may be large and complex. However, if you approach these changes with that project management methodology, you'll really be able to mitigate hasty and perhaps even ill-conceived decisions.
Business priorities. The entire project and all associated decisions should be based on a prioritized list of business requirements. I would argue that this is one of the more critical ones, as it serves as a cornerstone throughout the implementation. And it's also something that you can get an early start on to prepare for their work. So this first set of do's on this topic are things that you can do in advance to set you up for success. One of the very first things you should do for the project is create a mission statement. If you built a business case for the project, then you probably already have this embedded in there somewhere. Then define some guiding principles which will help you achieve this mission. For example, your mission statement could be transform my Treasury function through the implementation of a world-class Treasury system. Then some related guiding principles could be increase process efficiencies or simplify the systems landscape. These should be signed off by the steering committee for this project and can be used to define the future state vision, and as a result, you can define your future state processes easier. This next item can be done before the implementation even begins. Gather all your requirements and prioritize them. Now for the challenging part. You have to manage those requirements once they've been defined. If it's a larger project, then consider implementing a formal change management process. If it's a smaller project, then make a habit of staying disciplined. It's really common for these projects to be at risk of scope increase, so it needs to be managed and timelines and budgets adjusted accordingly. Lastly, even the smaller projects will require a detailed project plan with tasks, owners, and target dates. Make sure that it's owned by the project manager and it's updated regularly to be used as an effective tool for managing the project. Next slide, please, Arby. Thank you. This next set of do's apply to the execution phase of the project. Once you're in the implementation phase, make timely decisions and keep the project moving. You will be facing a lot of decisions during the design phase, and projects that continuously stall for decision and rescoping are never as successful as those that keep moving. Then, when you are challenged by a decision, refer back to the guiding principles and requirements to help and guide you. Lastly, make sure that you honor those prioritized business needs by making a good decision based on the information you have. Recognize that it will take some time to gather all the information you need, and some will be internally available while others will be sourced externally, such as from your vendors and consultants. Now onto the pitfalls to avoid. During the requirements gathering stage, don't fall into the trap of marking everything as a high priority item, as this will not serve you well when you enter the design stage, as I mentioned previously. Some items are naturally lower priority, and don't assume that they need to be marked as high priority in order to be implemented. Also, don't stray from the overall goals of the project. It's easy to get lost in the weeds once you get into the system and are faced with all the available options. And lastly, don't lose perspective and fret over making the perfect decision. You can only make the best decision based on the information you have on hand.
Thanks, Alicia. I think you make a really good point, and through the implementations I've seen and done in the past, and we even, I think, actually added that as a graphic there, that those initial business plans and not only the plan, but the prioritized plan, that one thing is more important than another, et cetera, really becomes the target that everything leads towards, and making that successful project, decisions to keep that project moving. And not get in disarray. So thank you. The next item is C for collaboration. So I think as you look at the slide and read it there, the one important point I wanted to highlight is the fact that we underlined appropriate. And so the intent of collaboration is not to involve everyone. We're not blind to corporate structures and red tape. And we all know that oftentimes the more people that you include or involve, the longer it takes to make decisions, and it can become more difficult. However, it is important and critical to involve the essential groups of people. Many projects that we've seen over time become stalled because the business owners, the folks in this particular case in Treasury, were not aware that they needed to involve, for example, IT. Early on in the process, or because they assumed that they could contact the accounting person at the last minute, and that would be okay. To do a little research up front and understand which departments and individuals needs to be important will help that project continue to move forward. When you partner with a TMS vendor, one of the things you could consider during that buying process is that you should really consider them for more than just the functionality. That's not to say the functionality is not important, But your vendor can give you can have a great deal of experience across a wide range of companies and industries, and if chosen wisely can really add valuable insight to best practices and options that you'll have as you make those decisions. The second bullet point in involving colleagues I've already discussed to some degree, so I'm not going to go into that in further detail. But there on the third bullet point, in terms of engaging third parties early, one thing to remember, just like your companies, is third parties, banks, trading platforms, etc. They go through resource planning on their own and are going to require that advance notice to make sure that they're available in your timeline to perform these interfaces and help in that project. In terms of the don't side, this is a very specific don't as it relates to interfacing with third-party systems. But during that buying process, even before implementation, it's recommended that you check with your third parties to ensure that their integration capabilities. Who can they interface with? What are their requirements in terms of file formats, etc. Treasury doesn't sit on an island, and Treasury is highly dependent upon information from outside systems and providers. So we mentioned trading platforms, accounting systems, etc. We want to make sure that that ecosystem is ready to support you towards a successful project. Alicia?
Those are all great points, Arby. I'd say one item I just want to emphasize is to really view your relationship with your vendor as a long-term one. Truly partner up with them as they have as much skin in the game as you do. This is true for both during the implementation as well as after. So after you go live, have regular check-ins with your account manager and work with them to address any gaps you may have identified during the project. More often than not, vendors are open to incorporating them into their roadmap for feature enhancements. So moving on to documentation, certainly not the most interesting topic, but one that is still crucial. I think it's safe to say that everyone knows to expect tasks around documentation on these types of projects, but it is almost always underestimated in terms of scope and therefore effort. So the first bullet point here really talks about creating user guides. So typically you would create user guides that documented new workflows, but I would suggest that you also include design decisions that led to that workflow. Oftentimes I encounter questions around why a certain thing was done a certain way, which results in a lot of wasted effort and time and effort if it hasn't been documented. And this usually involves rehashing of past conversations and even sometimes reverting on decisions as a result. Also, document the configurations that support these workflows. Most of the TMS in the space offer multiple options to achieve the same end result. So this can serve as a guide not just for your system administrator, but also for your vendor support team. And then the last two bullet points here are obvious, but again, something I don't always see being done. First, make sure the documentation is made accessible to users, and second, keep this documentation updated. As Arby mentioned earlier, your system will evolve over time, so workflows and configurations can certainly be updated as a result. So a couple of don'ts. As I mentioned, even if documentation is planned for, it often gets sidelined for other tasks. So sometimes it is not completed at all, or it's hastily put together to check the box. Documentation should be viewed as a value-add activity and performed as close to real-time as possible in order to capture all the necessary details. This will mitigate the second point here, which is to ensure knowledge sharing and cross-training, which is even more critical when original project team members move on from their position.
Perfect. Now on to my favorite topic. In Treasury, a Treasury professional may only implement a software solution once. Many don't do it at all. Maybe once is kind of the average, and a few people get 2 or 3, etc. But regardless of the number of times you do it, we really don't become experts in system implementations. However, in Treasury and Finance, we deal with expectations all the time, and really should be experts on this topic. We deal with expectations with things like yield curves, FX curves, stock prices, earning expectations. Those are all part of our daily jobs, and we're intimately familiar with and know what happens when these expectations are met. And you know what? In all honesty, and as a principle, implementations are no different. So as we look at some expectation do's and don'ts, first, letting people know about process change or to anticipate that process change. This ties back to our prior conversation on change management. And as I said before, more likely than not, your processes will change in connection with the TMS implementation. And it works best when people are prepared for that change. Also, in terms of that second bullet point in identifying the gaps up front, in connection with Alicia's comments on business priorities, that blueprint analysis, that upfront work serves as a target for the process, for the project, and it really allows us to know the end results we're all shooting for. I think I did mention that a little bit earlier. And it also helps us as we run across issues. I think Alicia did a great job of saying, okay, if you run across those road bumps, those priorities and that business plan are really going to help and should help drive the decision. So to quote Stephen Covey, it's really that principle of beginning with the end in mind. The last bullet point in terms of investing time. Given the fact that most of us will implement it, that are implementing or will implement a TMS system, we're still going to be asked to do our daily jobs. We're still going to be asked to be cash managers, risk managers, and implement a treasury management system at the same time. So it's really tempting in those situations to rush through the priority and planning stages. We get that mentality of, okay, let's just get this going, let's get it over with, let's just move forward, rush right in. And to draw on another profession, a good architect never rushes into a building or a building project without first having a good plan up front. This doesn't mean there won't be roadblocks along the way, but it does mean that you'll be better prepared to face them and face those roadblocks and keep that project moving, keep it going forward. In terms of the don'ts and underestimating that power of resistance to change, I mentioned earlier that prior to working in the Treasury technology space, I worked with implementing ERP systems. And getting people to change the way they've, again, quote unquote, always done things can be one of the most challenging parts of an implementation. To implement, to mitigate that resistance, I would recommend three things. The first one is understand what the old process was. How did they do things? Understand why along those lines. Understand what the new process will be. And then the third item is be able to articulate the benefits and value of the new process. Just because to be able to come in and say, because I said so, as we all know, just doesn't work, and you'll continue to get that resistance to change. On the scope changes, and as it listed here, expect scope changes don't expect scope changes are free for time and money resources. And that may sound obvious, but I wouldn't bring it up if the practice itself was treated as obvious during the implementation. A good vendor will scope a project up front, and as part of that pricing process before you buy, you're going to have a good understanding, a solid sense of that scope and its associated costs. And if there's a change, you'll be able to anticipate what that time and maybe even money change is going to be with the associated scope change. And then finally, don't think that there's no work on your part. While some vendors will assume a large majority of the workload during the implementation, this doesn't absolve the client or the company from work altogether. So please ensure you have the right resources and the right quantity of resources, because both of those will be very critical to the project success. Like any project, we recommend a project manager on the client side. This way there's someone to drive the project timeline, and that's actually a hub for all the issues. It doesn't mean that the project manager has to do all the work, but they should be directing all or most of that traffic. And then finally, on a quick comment on the quality and quantity of resources, because both are truly important. Just because somebody has free time doesn't mean that they're the right person or that they're qualified to manage the project. To give you a quick example, somebody who's worked in cash management all their career may have a great deal of difficulty responding to questions about deriving change in hedging and hedge accounting. And the reverse of that is true. A risk manager may have difficulty doing that on the cash side. So make sure you've got the right resources to be involved in that project. Alicia, on to A.
Thanks, Arby. And what better way to round out our ABCs than with a quote from a wise man? The measure of intelligence is the ability to change. I'm guessing that Einstein was not talking about TMS implementations, but this can certainly be applied here. I would consider this to be a key factor in truly transforming your Treasury function and fully utilizing a TMS. So a natural starting point for these projects is to review current state processes with a focus on identifying the pain points. Manual tasks are natural candidates for improvement, but review automated tasks as well. Some automated steps may become redundant in the future state and can be eliminated altogether. Also look at upstream processes as well, certain processes were built to support a particular format or data set that may no longer fit your business. For instance, legacy systems may have retired and their replacements may be able to accommodate changes in your processes. So two important items to keep in mind once you start working in the system. First, be open-minded once you start working with the selected system, because in reality, there is no system that will accommodate 100% of your requirements. So expect there to be gaps and document these, as we mentioned previously. You can take it a step further and prioritize them so you can advocate for the more important ones with your vendor. From my experience, users that move from a spreadsheet-based process to a system struggle the most during the transition because they're losing some level of freedom. So they can benefit from keeping this point in mind as well as the next one. If a system cannot accommodate your requirement, take the opportunity to reassess the related process, as it's a potential indication that your process is not following best practice. TMS vendors incorporate best practices where possible, so you may in fact be facing an opportunity to standardize or even enhance your process. I've definitely seen projects get stalled or even worse due to poor management of issues, so this is definitely a high-risk one. The early imagery on keeping perspective can be applied here as well, as it's a fact that issues will arise, whether they are related to technical problems, lack of resources, or system limitations. So maintain a log and use it to communicate as well as track these items. Again, priorities can be applied to problems as well. Some may be more critical than others, but these priorities can guide you on where to spend your energy. Lastly, I know this was mentioned earlier, but it's crucial, so I think it's worth repeating. Momentum is absolutely crucial to these projects. So ensure that you keep that by keeping the project moving forward.
Wonderful, thanks, Alicia. I think the flexibility is a nice way to end. It really relates back to all the things we've covered, in terms of looking for the adoption, making sure that you're managing change in processes along with the system, business priorities, collaboration, etc. So in conclusion, and to recap the ABCs, A, run the implementation with the overall goal of system adoption, not just simply implementation. B, create and base every decision on the business priorities you've established. C, collaborate with the appropriate parties. D, document what you do. E, ensure that you set the right expectations for all the appropriate stakeholders. And F, be flexible. We hope at the end of this you'll be able to use the ABCs of the TMS implementation as a checklist as you go through and look to have a successful implementation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, RB, and I'd like to thank our speakers for today as well as all of you out there who are attending. We appreciate your time and we hope this has been valuable for you. If you have any interest in this topic, we have a white paper and an ebook available on Kyriba's website, kyriba.com. Also, if you like the time frame of this particular webinar series, on July 20th we'll be having a similar time frame for a topic of global liquidity management, and on July 28th we'll be talking about FX hedging and compliance. So we hope you can join us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.